Hello people of the internet, if anyone sees this, probably not, but if you happen to stumble upon this video, today we're going to do a mid-free agency mock draft. I understand that free agency is still going on, there's some big signings that can still occur, but we're going to go ahead and do a mock draft anyway. Obviously these takes could be casual, but we'll have to see as we go along and see how they age. Obviously number one, we got the Raiders. They're going for Fernando Mendoza. Obviously the best quarterback. They've been building around him in free agency with Tyler Linderbaum, and that's about it actually on offense. But still, it's okay. Then the Jets, we got him going Arvell Reese. I think Arvell Reese is an interesting player because I think he's really good at linebacker and off the edge. But I think that he actually fits two needs for the Jets then, because their linebacker game isn't that good. And then obviously they traded Jermaine Johnson to the Titans, so they got no edges there, I'm going to be honest. So they could really play him either position. It would be pretty beneficial for them, and I think he's probably the third most talented player in this draft. And then third, I have the Cardinals going with, there he is, Spencer Fano. The reason I have him going over Francis Magnoa as a tackle in this draft, because obviously he's been good throughout his career, only allowing a total of 3 sacks, and this season he looked really good. But also, I think people in this league are viewing Francis Magnoa as a better guard, and guards aren't valued as high as tackles are. And you could argue that the Cardinals could probably wait to get a tackle, and they could go with someone like Jeremiah Love or a David Bailey or Ruben Bain of that player. But I just don't value them at the third overall pick, where I think Spencer Fano is guaranteed to at least be above average tackle in this league. And also pair him up with a pretty good O-line that they already have with Paris Johnson and Isaac Samamalu. Whoever that quarterback is going to be well protected. Number 4, I do have the Titans going with Jeremiah Love. Before free agency, I would say that David Bailey or Ruben Bain are a better fit for the Titans, and they still are. They still need an edge, don't get me wrong. But in free agency, they didn't really acquire any offensive pieces to really help Cam Ward, their franchise QB, to win more games. Obviously, they've signed Wan'Dale Robinson, but we'll see how good he is. But Jeremiah Love, obviously, I think, is the second most athletic player, or you can argue number 1 in this class. Obviously, his stats aren't as good as Genty's, as we saw a year ago, but he also played at Notre Dame, where Genty played at Boise, so different competition. But it seemed like Notre Dame didn't know they had Jeremiah Love until like the 3rd week. Like, they didn't really know how to use him, and then they just started spamming the A button with him. So I think that you could argue that he could go further down because he's a running back and he's not valued. But honestly, before free agency, we all thought it was the Saints or Chiefs going for him, but they filled those holes. And the Giants, I'm going to have them going with Caleb Downs. And the reason for this is honestly because their main need is that secondary, I think. And honestly, the best corner available right now is Mansour Delaney. He's going to be the first corner off this board. And do I think he's played well enough to go number 5 in this class? I don't think so, at least. So I wouldn't take Mansour Delaney at 5, where at least when you know you're taking Caleb Downs, he's a player with experience in the playoffs. We know he's really athletic, and he has high upside. Sure, he's a safety and he's not valued as much, but Javon Holland did not look really good for that team, and I think that they could go with a wide receiver if they want. But they kind of have a good wide receiver room, I would say, with the addition of Darnell Mooney and Calvin Austin. Those two could both obviously be wide receiver 2s, so it's not an immediate need for them. Plus, they signed Isaiah Likely, which is also a receiving threat to help Jackson Dart. So I think helping this defense with Caleb Downs would be really good. And then the Browns, I do have them taking Francis Magnoa. I don't know who their quarterback is going to be, but Francis Magnoa, he's a good player, as I mentioned before, probably viewed as a guard by some teams. And another issue by him is he has short arms, which we were already wary about from Will Campbell, who obviously he did go, 3rd last year. So teams aren't afraid of the short arms, but then we saw what happened to Will Campbell against those long arm defenders in the playoffs, and maybe teams are a little more wary. So it's going to have him taking Francis Magnolia to help out that QB. And then the Commanders were a team that I was considering Jeremiah Love going to. But this free agency, I think it eliminated their need to draft a defensive player right away. I know they could have drafted Ruben Bain or David Bailey, which are still on this board. But I'm not too concerned with the edge rushing with the signings that they made. But something that they did not address was wide receiver help. So I think for Jaden Daniels to get to the next level, he needs that help. I'm going to have him going with Carnell Tate. Imagine Carnell Tate and Scary Terry. Obviously, Scary Terry, this is probably his last year playing for the Commanders. Carnell Tate, I think he's not the best wide receiver available right now. I'm going to be honest. Jordan Tyson, I think, is better. But his injury weaknesses is what holds him back. So I'm taking Carnell Tate to help for a new receiving threat because other than Scary Terry, there's nothing over there. Zach Ertz they had a good connection, but I don't think Zach Ertz is ever touching the field again. So I'm going Carnell Tate. Saints is where I'm going to have Montrell Delane landing. Because, again, you could argue for a wide receiver for this team, but not an immediate need, I think. I mean, Chris Olave is obviously could handle that room. Their secondary got poached this offseason, I think. Of course, with Alontae Taylor going to the Titans, which I don't know how that's going to help him because I don't think the Titans are going to be much better than the Saints. But we're going to keep Montrell Delane in the state of Louisiana. As I said before, I don't know if you could warrant that Montrell Delane is going to be the best corner in this class. Jermod McCoy, obviously, I think has higher potential, but the injury history. So we're going to have someone team up with Kool-Aid McKinstry, which is Montrell Delane. And we'll see what comes out of that. I know it's crazy that you guys are thinking that Ruben Bain and David Bailey are still falling, but I just think that after free agency, none of these teams need them immediately with these picks of the players still on the board. Fernando Mendoza, obviously the Raiders are taking. Jets could use RV Reach off the edge. Cardinals could use it, but they also have Josh Sweat. They don't immediately need edge rusher 1. Titans are a good one, but Giants have too many good D-line. The Browns don't need one immediately because they have Myles Garrett. The Commanders are playing Owe. And then Saints could have also, but they need some secondary help. And I just ran about that, so you probably think I'm picking one of them for the Chiefs. I'm not. I'm going Sonny Styles. He's athletic, put on a very good combine and Senior Bowl. I think he's really fast. He could play that pass protection. He could play the run. I think he's the best available option right now. I could argue, but now this rant is going somewhere. Because I'm going to have the Bengals taking David Bailey. Obviously, they picked Shamar Stewart last year. I don't think he was anywhere close to where they wanted him to be. Obviously, they got off on a bad foot with that contract situation that occurred last year, obviously. But David Bailey, I think, is the better player than Ruben Bain. Ruben Bain didn't look so good in that mid-season stretch. Looked good at the beginning, looked good at the end. But David Bailey looked pretty consistent throughout the whole season. Obviously, Texas Tech had easier opponents, you could argue, than Miami. So that's why the stats look better. But it doesn't really matter because Ruben Bain's going next to Dolphins. I think these picks are interchangeable. But I'm just going to have Ruben Bain going here. Keep him in Miami. The Dolphins need some rushing help. They obviously lost Jalen Phillips at the trade deadline. Bradley Chubb went to the Bills. And all they really have is Chop Robinson left. I think they draft... the name's slipping me, but they drafted that D-line last year in the first round. So I think we could add Ruben Bain to that room. And I think you could really pick any player here because the Dolphins need everyone because they're a poverty organization and just lost every player. But next up, we have the Cowboys. I'm going with Dylan Diamond. I think that Dylan Diamond looked good at Oregon at times. Didn't look amazing at sometimes, but looks good at others. Obviously, 6 foot, 205. He's young. By the time he gets onto that team, 22. The Cowboys need that secondary help. I don't love their secondary. Their D line is fine, I would say. Their offense doesn't really need any help. But at this point in the draft, I don't know if I feel good about picking Jamard McCoy this early with the injury history. And then the next best corner is Avion Terrell, which I would not feel comfortable with them picking at 12. So that's why I picked Dylan Dynaman. I know he's a safety, but that's just what's going to happen here. Now at 13, we have the Rams. I'm going to have the Rams going with Mekhi Lemon. Their defense after free agency does not need any more help. I mean, more help is always better, but their secondary, that issue got fixed real quick. Let's just say. So I think with Devontae Adams aging, I would like them taking Mekhi Lemon to team up with Puka. And actually, the Rams were pretty interested in trading for A.J. Brown. Rumors have it. So obviously, they wanted another really good wide receiver. And I think Mekhi Lemon is a very valuable wide receiver. And I think it's the best in this draft class. So I think that this move is good for the long term and will help them win the Super Bowl this season. 14, I have the Ravens going with Kenyon Sadiq. I think I had this mock in last mock draft too, but then I thought the pick got traded. But we're back to here. The Ravens could get some edge help, but I don't feel comfortable with any of these edge rushers going at 14. Caleb Banks was hurt, but showed some glimpses of greatness when he returned for like those 3 games. Looked good at the Senior Bowl, looked good at the Combine. But still, I think they're going to go with Kenyon Sadiq to get Lamar Jackson that help. Because any other help would be Jordan Tyson. And again, with the injury prone, I would just have to let him keep sliding. I think Kenyon Sadiq, they're going to have him sit behind Mark Andrews, trade him at the deadline. Kenyon Sadiq will be their number 1 guy because he's just really athletic and a really good player. Obviously, 6'3", 245 he's just kind of a thicker wide receiver, I could say. And obviously with Isaiah likely departing, Kenyon Sadiq could fill up that backup or starting role. Whether you want to say it, I think Kenyon Sadiq is a very good player here. 15, I do have the Bucs taking wherever he went. I think he's up here. Jamard McCoy. I know here it says that they don't need a DB here, but I think that they need to replace Jamel Dean. Jamel Dean was obviously a really good man-to-man player. Actually, the best in the league last year. Went to Pittsburgh in free agency, and I think they need to replace him. Looked really good in 24 and 23. Obviously, he unfortunately did not play last season due to injury. So no one really knows what he could do right now. But he has the potential and the upside. And the reason I just don't think they need any of these needs listed is tight end. They brought back Cade Otton. Edge they could use, I would have to say. But any of these edges I'm not comfortable with. As I said, Mesidor I'll bring up later. And then linebacker, they brought in Alex Anzalone. So the Jets with their second pick, I'm going to have them going with Monroe Freeling. Because at this point, they could have won wide receiver, but all the wide receivers I think are valuable enough, except for Jordan Tyson already got picked, and even if I don't think Tyson would fit into this scheme. Their defense got pretty good throughout free agency. So I think just getting the Monroe Freeling, which after his combine performance, I think his draft stock has risen a lot. I think just pair him with Armand Membu, which you drafted last year in the first round, and build whoever that QB of the future's O-line is to be, and Breece Hall, and just let them go crazy. Lions here, I'm going to have him going with TJ Allen to replace Alex Anzalone. TJ Allen looked better at times than others, I would have to say. But TJ Allen, 6'1", 235, good at run stopping, I think is a good replacement for Alex Anzalone. And other than that, the team could use some DB help, but also a lot of their defense was injured last year, so it's kind of hard to tell what they really need. But I'm going with CJ Allen. And then the Vikings, they're going to be the one to go with Caleb Downs because they lost Jonathan Allen and Hargrave to free agency. So they have no one for defensive tackle right now. So they could arguably go with Emmanuel McNeil Warren. but I think Caleb Banks has higher upside. So I'm going there. And then 19 for the Panthers was a little tricky because they made a lot of defensive moves. So I don't want to go defense here. But then their O-line wasn't too big of a need because they got Walker from the Packers. So honestly, I'm going with Jordan Tyson. Because obviously T-Mac looked good last year, won Offensive Rookie of the Year. Jalen Coker looked good at times, at least down the stretch he had his bright moment. I think the Xavier Legette experiment is over. And then other than that, they have no one else in that room. They don't have a tight end. They don't have anything too crazy. So I'm going with Jordan Tyson. Because I think they could take the risk on him being injury prone. Because, they're not winning this season. This is more of a long-term investment. But another thing I could say, they could maybe be wary because their picks in the first round have been injury prone the last few years and haven't very worked out. Well, I guess not first round, but their draft picks, Jonathan Brooks from Texas, their running back. I don't know if the dude ever touched the field. He just keeps getting injured. Then they had a tackle also, I think. But, yes. Number 20, I have the Cowboys going with Keldrick Falk to replace that Micah Parsons hole. They didn't really do anything for the edge. I know they were high on Max Crosby. They were trying to get him for a first and a second round pick, which could still occur. Max Crosby could still be on the market. I'm not too sure. Obviously, Keldrick Falk, 6'6", 285. He's a fast edge rusher. He's going to be 21. He has longer arms. And I think he has high upside, honestly. And I think he could actually be one of the best edge rushers in this league later on. 21, I do have the Steelers actually going with Omar Cooper Jr. Because they do need a QB, I do have to say. At the time of recording this, I don't know if Aaron Rodgers is coming back or not. We don't know that. But Ty Simpson is not valued at a first-round pick. They could use a guard. Now there's Sama Malu left. But again, I don't feel too comfortable about that either. And then they drafted Derek Carmen last year. They have Benton, so I'm not worried too about the D-line. And then safety, they just signed Jaquan Brisker. I know they just got Michael Pittman. So he is the wide receiver for 2, obviously. But by the time his contract's over, he's going to be 30. He's 27 right now. His production is on the downward trend. So why not bring in another wide receiver to be a good wide receiver 3? This move could be a win now move also. Get a good wide receiver 3. And then a good move for the future. He's 6 foot, 205, good route runner. Good athleticism as we saw from that Penn State game with the toe tap. Became Fernando Mendoza's dude down the stretch. And by the time Michael Pittman's out of Pittsburgh, he'll only be 25. So I think he's a good long-term investment for the Steelers. At 22, I have the Chargers going with Caden McDonald from Ohio State. He's a good run stopper. He's not too much of a get-to-the-quarterback type of guy. But he's a big body. 6'3", 326 to be in the middle and stop the run, which is something that I think the Chargers are looking for. Eagles, as I had last mock draft, I think I'm going Akeem Mesidor. I think this is still kind of a win now move. Because obviously they need an edge rusher with Jalen Phillips exiting to the Panthers. The only issue, and I think the reason he's actually even sliding this far down, is because of age. He's going to be 25 by the time he gets onto an NFL team. But if an NFL team is still trying to win the Super Bowl, he's a player with a lot of experience. And I think he could be helpful to a team where the window is still open, like the Eagles. The window is shut in, but the window is still there. So I think he could be a good player for a win now. I don't know how good he'll look in the future because by the time his rookie contract's over, he's 29. So just saying that. And then the Browns, with their second pick, going to help in the offense here with Denzel Boston. Denzel Boston is something that Browns wide receiver room does not have. Height. 6'4", 209, good route runner for his size. I think he can make plays the other wide receivers can't on that team. Jerry Jeudy is kind of their number one, I would have to say. And what is he, like 5'11"? Isaiah Bond is a wide receiver too that we didn't see much of, but he's a pretty talented young guy. But he's also not that tall. Denzel Boston could go up for those 50-50 balls. And I like the way Dale Washington and think he can contribute to the Browns. Then at 25, I do have the Bears going with Peter Woods. Obviously, at the beginning of the season, Peter Woods was a top 3 pick for every mock draft. He didn't produce much this season with Clemson, but as I say with every Clemson player, as I can mention later also with some of these picks, Clemson was not playing for anything. So maybe that's why his production was as high as it was the last 2 years. Obviously, that's a bad mindset that teams could see if that is the case. Tuka also could explain the slide, but I think he has high upside. He's a good run stuffer. He's a big guy, 6'3", 310, only 21. I think he's high upside, and I think that's what the Bears need right now. Obviously, we're losing a lot of players free agency also. Just have to mention that. And then 26, I have the Bears going with Peter Woods' teammate, TJ Parker. Obviously, they lost Joey Bosa to free agency. They signed Bradley Chubb, but they still need to bring in a young guy. Obviously, his numbers, as I just mentioned, Peter Woods, better in 24 and 23. Obviously, wasn't playing for much, but I still think he has that high upside, and he's a fast edge rusher that can help them out. 27, I have the 49ers going with, not even going to pronounce it, but you know him, the best guard in this class. Guards are not valued, so that's the only reason why he's even down this low. He's a pretty good guard, I would have to say. 49ers could use a guard because hopefully have less injuries in that backfield. And their defense has been growing since they've had nothing the last few years, but with injuries getting better, bringing in new people, I think their defense doesn't really need help. That wide receiver room does not need as much help now that Mike Evans is on that team, so I'm just going to have him going with guard. And then weirdly, I'm going to have another guard going right after, which is in Emmanuel Pregnon to the Texans. Texans need O-line help, but not tackle. They've been signing a lot of tackles. Don't have them off the top of my head right now. I know Brandon Smith is one of them from the Colts. That was a good signing. So tackle is not that big of a help. Another thing I could see is them going with D-line. They lost Tim Settle, so I could see them going with someone like Christian Miller. But CJ Stroud did not look good in those games, and I think that was because of the O-line. So let's just get him some help there. And then 29, we have the Chiefs. I have them going with Avion Terrell. Obviously, any of these dudes that they draft for the secondary are starting immediately because they have not a single player on that secondary team. Because all of them left. But Avion Terrell actually is a good player, brother of AJ Terrell, and he has a good upside, I would say. The only thing he's a little short is in 5'11 and 180. But he had some okay production, I would have to say. Obviously, as I mentioned before, I keep repeating myself, but Clemson wasn't playing for everything. That can maybe explain the production, but I think he has some upside. At pick 30, I have the Broncos. I have them actually going with Christian Miller, because they did lose one of their defensive tackles in free agency. Name's not on top of my head right now, but Christian Miller is actually a pretty good pass rusher and a run stopper. Obviously, as we see right there, he has some quarterback pressures here. He obviously doesn't get to the quarterback a lot, but he's a good run stopper. 6'4", 310, and I like some of his highlights this season. Had sparks of greatness. And at 31, Patriots is interesting because obviously they released Stephon Diggs. I don't know if Romeo Doubs is the number one guy, but I don't know if I love Casey Concepcion to go in the first round here. So I'm not going to do that. They could go with O-line, but I am just going to have him go with Cassius Howard. Cassius Howell is overall a pretty good player, I would have to say. His production did dip in 24, but I say he's a pretty average player, and I think he could be a long-term starter on this team. Obviously, they lost Chise into free agency, so he could just fill in that hole. And then pick 32. This is probably really unlikely, but I'm going to have him going with Jeremiah Love's running mate and Jadarian Price. Because realistically, they're probably going to go with the secondary pick here. Because they lost most of their secondary. They re-signed Job, but they did lose Wolen. They still have Witherspoon. They lost Kobe Bryant. So, realistically, the pick here is probably actually Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. and then or Colton Hurd. But for a little fun, I'm gonna have going Jadarian Price because they lost K9. Zach Charbonnet is probably not playing the first half of the season. They did not pick up anyone in free agency. And obviously, Jadarian Price, I think, is the second best running back in this class. He was always overshadowed by Jeremiah Love. But even with him, his production was still good. He was still averaging 6 yards per carry in all 3 of his seasons. I think he's a good elusive back. 5'11", 210. I'd like him as a player. This is probably unrealistic of him going here. But I'm going to have him picking Jadarian Price. Alright, guys. This is the final draft here for my mid-free agency mock draft. Obviously, I know some of these picks were extremely casual, a little fun. And if anyone watches, probably not. But if you somehow stumble upon the video, please leave a like, subscribe, comment. It would mean the world to me. And we're going to keep pushing out these mock drafts and appreciate anyone that watched. So thank you.